In terms of my involvement in the profession, as I said, I'd joined the society very early. I believed that you couldn't change your profession or do anything for your profession unless you were part of it, and I always had that strong sense of responsibility, and it didn't seem too much of an awesome thing for me to be a member of a committee or to take on a responsibility as a chair. But I was never ambitious in terms of what I would be doing in that area, but from the branch level it ended up that I finally became a member of the executive of the society and then eventually its president for 2 terms. But alongside that, I had an interest in conferences, and when I'd lived in Hong Kong, I heard about people who were going to the WCPT conference in Israel. And I thought, well, that sounds rather an interesting thing to do. It would be a good way to get to Israel. But in fact, I didn't go. It was always on my mind that WCPT, we had this world body of physiotherapy that I'd heard of before but hadn't ever been part of. So after I'd come back to Dunedin, the next WCPT conference was on in Stockholm. And I thought that would be a nice challenge to go to that. And we also were talking at that time of having, I think we'd agreed that we would run the next conference in Dunedin, seeing that Auckland couldn't get it off the ground. So I went to Stockholm and remember being put as a chair of a session, and of course in those days there were 2 official languages, French and English. And many of the people who were presenting in my session were speaking in French, so that was a bit of a challenge. There were interpreters for you to listen through if you wanted to when you were in the audience, but not really an interpreter for the chair of the session. So I think I got my schoolgirl French out again, and I actually managed to ask a couple of questions at the end of the presentation, so that was all right. But I remember one of the other things that was happening at the conference, which really is not part of WCPT, but the Scandinavian countries were protesting about South Africa and some of the other members of WCPT. And I felt very sad that WCPT has never, ever been politically motivated or orientated. That's not part of its ethics or general rules. But these people took it on themselves to protest at the conference. But that was a great experience to get to know some other people from other countries, some of whom I'd met before. But I guess it was the beginning of a wider involvement in the WCPT. And one of the things that had come through our society, because the WCPT would always report to the member organisations, and I remember as president, they were talking about dividing into regions and having an Asia Western Pacific region and 4 other regions. And we as a society didn't really feel strongly inclined towards that because it was another cost in that somebody would have to go to a regional meeting and be a regional representative and all that sort of thing. And we were still struggling as a society to actually make ends meet and to have our own premises, let alone have anything more than a typewriter. So we did discuss it, and we agreed that if it was possible for someone from the society to go, or if one of us was travelling somewhere and could sort of fit it in on the way, that we would participate. And so I did attend one of the meetings, and one of them also was being held in Indonesia. This was in 94, I think, because I'd been to the centennial celebrations for the Charter Society of Physiotherapy. They invited the presidents from all other member countries to attend if they could, and they also had their conference running at the same time, so I actually attended that. And then the AWP regional meeting was actually coinciding with that, so I was able to go to Indonesia on the way home and participated in the meeting and could see that there were some important things that we could do in terms of a number of the countries in the region not being as well established in physiotherapy as Australia and New Zealand. And it wasn't just going to be a them and us and, you know, trying to help them in that way, but it was more just the collaboration and the opportunity for physiotherapists to get together and to meet each other and speak the common language that we have. So I did have some early opportunities to participate in WCPT regional meetings, and then I also probably have attended nearly all of the WCPT conferences from the Stockholm one onwards. The only one I didn't get to was Sydney because I was involved in writing my master's thesis at that time and was a student and didn't feel that I could afford the time to go over there. But we had some post-conference courses in New Zealand, so we still sort of had a link with that. But I have been to all the other WCPT meetings. And then a few years ago, I was asked if I would consider being as a New Zealander, being part of the Asia Western Pacific region and maybe taking on the chair of the region. And I considered that because I no longer had a direct association with the executive of the society, having had my term, and I thought that it could be something that I might be able to contribute to. And so I was elected the chair of the region. And again, it's a difficult region in some respects to communicate around because there's so much sea separating just about every country, and it's not like Europe where they can all just drive on a fast train and get to a meeting. And so each region is very unique and set up in its own way, and we hardly have any money and all those sorts of things, but it was a really good opportunity for me to try and revamp the region in a way that people were communicating again and feeling as if they could communicate. And of course that was made so much easier by the fact that many of the countries now have got internet opportunities and people can have cell phones, and so somebody living in Nepal or Indonesia or Fiji can communicate with me just as quickly as somebody who lives down the road. And I could really see that that was opening up tremendous opportunities for the smaller countries who had become member organisations to really have a more significant role. And they're so appreciative of the opportunity to say that they are members of WCPT. It really is quite a contrast when you come to our NZSP conference. WCPT hardly gets a mention. You know, it's a focus on NZSP, which is fine. But when you go to a conference in Nepal or a country like that, they've got the WCPT logo up and they say we're members of WCPT, and they're so proud of that, and it's a really important thing for them when they're going to government to ask for funding or to get any sort of contribution from a ministry. They need to say that they are part of a bigger organisation. So I really had a wonderful experience with being the chair of the region for 4 years and trying to facilitate communication amongst the regions and trying to get people to attend the meetings and contribute. And I have had some good opportunities to visit countries like Nepal and Malaysia and Singapore and attend their conferences and really just get a feel for what the priorities are for them in those countries. And many of the priorities are the same as ours. You know, we've got obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and it's a worldwide problem, and we don't have enough people to manage it. So there's a huge opportunity for physiotherapists to be involved in that way. And one of the other things that we initiated in the region was a position statement that the WCPT now holds on disaster management and the role of physiotherapists in disaster management. And again, we haven't got to the point of formalising it or determining any of the outcomes yet, but it was approved at the WCPT meeting last year, and it really, one of the first things that we want to try and encourage the member organisations to do is in their own countries to facilitate the schools of physiotherapy to ensure that they're teaching their undergraduates about managing people who are victims of disasters, because invariably there are post-disaster complications like amputees, respiratory infections from near drowning, and other spinal injuries that happen as a result of the disaster. And very often the funds are there for the initial disaster, but they never are sufficient to carry on with the rehabilitation. And I think as a physiotherapy profession, we need to be more proactive in that area and to be at the round the table end, so that we're saying to the people who create the decisions about managing a disaster that you need to think about the rehabilitation side, and although we may not have a major responsibility in the very acute first few weeks, we certainly need to be there as a profession facilitating the ongoing rehabilitation of the disaster victims. And invariably the stories are that they run out of money when the media no longer have an interest in it, and then people have to fend for themselves. And Myanmar is an example of that at the moment. I mean, people can't even get in with their aid, let alone finding out what's going on, because they're such a close country. And then there's China, of course, with its disaster the next 2 weeks afterwards, where they are finally seeking help from others, but they don't have a system in China where they've got physiotherapists to actually manage the rehabilitation. So that's another issue that is a key one for our region, is to find a way to involve China in the profession internationally and to eventually have their physiotherapists recognised as physiotherapists. So they do have a few graduates who've either trained overseas or in one program that was set up in Wuhan by the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. But we want those people to become a small group and to eventually facilitate the opportunity for other physiotherapists to be educated in China, and then they'll be able to set up a constitution, have an organisation, and finally become a member organisation of WCPT. And I've just been in China recently, just really doing that, just facilitating the initial discussions for the local people as to how they can become a member of the WCPT. And it will be great when they do become a member, because they're a big power and they're going to be very forward in terms of power of the world for the future. And their people need to have the opportunity to have physiotherapy services just like anyone else. So moving back then to my role in the region, the term of office obviously as chair is a 2-year term, and then you're invited, or you might put your hand up again for another 2 years. But at the end of the 4-year period in June, when we had the WCPT conference in Vancouver, that was the time when I stood down as the chair of the region, but I had just been elected on to the executive of the WCPT. So that responsibility began in June of 2007, and it's a 4-year term, so that the term of office, or the first term of office, runs through to the next Congress, which will be Stockholm in 2011. So already we've had several meetings. We had our first meeting at the Congress in Vancouver, and again, the WCPT is not a body that is flush with funds. It's really very dependent upon its international congresses that it runs every 4 years for its major funding, apart from the subs that are contributed by the member organisations, but it doesn't really have many other funding resources, and so the ability for the executive to meet in person is somewhat limited by the funds that are there. The conference in Vancouver was successful enough for us to think about meeting twice a year at the moment, and so that's what we're hoping to do for 2008. But we need to be very circumspect with the use of the monies and the best use of the monies, and we're looking at ways of being able to facilitate education opportunities for people through the WCPT web, and having links with other groups that could provide those programs, setting up opportunities for countries to maybe bring in people who are well used to developing curriculums and those sorts of things, so that people would give of their time, but there's always some cost. You can't do these things just absolutely for free. So we're looking at ways of facilitating that, so that we can assist not just the well-established groups, but also the ones that are in need. And already there's a number of new countries that have joined WCPT. We're over the 100 mark now. And many of them are small countries, but again, it means so much to them to be a member, and at least if they're a member, we know they have a constitution locally which has ethics and has equal opportunity for men and for women to practice physiotherapy. And we also have the strong association through the World Health Organization as being a recognised associate of the WHO, so that we can have a voice through WHO, and just like nursing and medicine and some of the other health professions do. And hopefully we are making a difference in terms of what we can contribute around the world. So it'll be a fascinating 4 years. Again, it's already given me wonderful opportunities to meet people from different places and to have some more links with Asia, and perhaps having had that experience of working there a few years ago has been helpful in terms of my ability to appreciate some of their lifestyle and culture, and not be put off by going to a market or whatever, because it's not unnatural for me to do that, and I think hopefully that will help some of the Asian people in terms of building up their rapport with me and with WCPT, and seeing what happens for the next step.